Welcome to Clarksville's Miss May, in search of the identity of another Clarksville businesswoman. Miss May was known for decades in Clarksville as a madam, and as I had done for Belle, another famous madam of Clarksville, I wanted to get to the identity of Miss May. I'm not going to go into what happened in her house, but I am going to show you how I learned her identity, who she was, what she did while she was in Clarksville. It's quite a remarkable story. I hope you'll appreciate the research journey that I undertook in getting to the bottom of her identity. Before I started this research, I didn't know who Miss May was, but I did know who Pauline Tabor of Bowling Green was. She was a very famous madam in Bowling Green who wrote a tell-all book in the 1970s talking about her time in Bowling Green being a madam. She has one chapter in that book dedicated to a trip she made to Clarksville in 1937 to meet Miss May to learn how to start such a business. This research project came out of a Facebook posting where someone was discussing Pauline and mentioning Miss May of Clarksville. The supposition in that Facebook post was that, as Pauline had done with the other people in her book, that Miss May was a pseudonym, and even the address given for Clarksville in that book was made to protect the innocence, protect the identity of someone. So I thought, well, I can get to the bottom of that. I can look at the clues and I can figure out maybe who she really was and was that information accurate or not. In Pauline's book, she does refer to going to Miss May's house, so she calls her Miss May. She talks about getting into a cab at the train station and asking to be taken to 1116 College Street, hoping that that address wouldn't mean anything, but she says she was mistaken. So the cab driver knew exactly what was going on at 1116 College Street, according to the book. Later on in the book, she talks about Miss May coming to visit her in Bowling Green, and that Miss May had been retired for more than 10 years, living in comfort in Florida. So, based on the assertion that Miss May was a pseudonym and that 1116 College was a made-up address to protect the identity of this madam of Clarksville, I decided to go and search for myself. So come along with me. First, I wanted to look at the clue of 1116 College Street. If you try to find 1116 College Street today, you'll end up at about this location. This building is today Mike's Tire Service. When I was growing up, it was Mr. Woody Shelton's Shell Station. But when I was growing up, this was not College Street. This was actually called Pettis Street. And perhaps that's one reason why the person who was asking about Pauline expressed a frustration that she didn't know where 1116 College Street even was today. I'm going to show you a map of Clarksville from 1930s, 1938. This was drawn by Julia Hodgson of Clarksville while she was a student at Peabody College. This map comes from the Tennessee State Library and Archives' wonderful website called TIVA, Tennessee Virtual Archive. So this is part of Clarksville. I'm going to show you the street names for this map, which weren't part of it, but you can see that College Street originally came south from 11th and intersected with Franklin as it does today, and that this street that we now call College used to be known as Pettis Street. So in the time of Miss May, College Street is what we now would call East College Street. If you go to 1116 East College Street today, what you'll find is this car lot that's associated with Scott Wrecker Service. There you can see the building in the back. So 1116 College Street today is 1116 East College Street, and there's no structure there now. But this is the location that Pauline visited Miss May in 1937. So I wanted to set out and find out what was going on at 1116 College Street. And here are the first two records that I found, and I found them quite quickly when I started my search. The 1922 Clarksville City Directory, I'll zoom in on it. There's an entry for Mrs. May Neely, a widow, although widow is misspelled there, living in a home at 1116 College Street. So we already have, at least 15 years before Pauline visited, a woman named May living at 1116 College Street. So right off the bat, I'm thinking these are not a made-up name and a made-up address. That her name was May Neely, and yes, she lived at 1116 College Street. The second record I found was the 1929 Clarksville City Directory, and we have May Neely living in a house at 1116 College Street. So here I'm getting the impression that her name really was May Neely, and that she really did live at 1116 College Street, that Pauline didn't try to hide that part of Miss May's story. These records just took me a very few minutes to find on Ancestry, and at this point I actually shared these two records back with that original Facebook post, and I got a surprising response from the person who had originally posed the questions about Miss May. She was rather indignant, and even implying that I had fabricated these two pieces of evidence. And I thought, well, I'm going to take that up as a challenge to see the whole story, more about May Neely and 1116 College Street. So I next went to the 1920 census records to see who was living at 1116 College Street. Here's that page from the 1920 census, and I'm going to zoom in for you here to 1116 College Street. You can see College Street named here and the street address 1116, and consistent with the city directory entries is May Neely, head of household. The O and F there mean that she owned the house freely, no mortgage. She was female, she was white, 32 years old, and married. The married is an interesting indication there. There's no one else in this household. The rest of the census record there says that she was born in Kentucky, that her father was born in Tennessee, her mother born in Kentucky. The yes there means that she spoke English. The none is her occupation, so she lived there by herself and had no occupation, at least according to the 1920 census record. Moving on to the 1930 census record, again we see at 1116 College Street, May McNeely. So the last name is slightly different this time. Now it says McNeely. She's head of household. The H there means that she was doing housework for a living. The O means that she owned the house. It was worth $1,500. The R in the 1930 census meant that she owned a radio, which seemed to be different than most of her neighbors. The No meant it was not a farm. She was female, she was white, she was 42 years old. It says here that she was divorced. There's a great clue in the 1930 census. The 23 there asked how old she was when she first got married. So that does support the idea that she was married, but maybe she got divorced after that. The No means that she wasn't in school. The Yes meant that she could read and write. And I'll show you the rest of that census record. Here it says she was born in Kentucky and both of her parents in Kentucky. The yes out here at the end means that she did speak English. Again, the occupation is listed as none. So now we have a McNeely as the possible surname instead of Neely. Still got to look for more records to figure that part out. So let's move ahead to the 1940 Clarksville census. Still in the same neighborhood. At this point, I want to mention also that she was living by herself, supposedly, according to these records, in a neighborhood that was heavily black. Very few black people in this neighborhood, but she's there living by herself, possibly, and operating a business. So 1940 census, 1116 College Street, May McNeely, so there's the McNeely again. She owned the house. It was worth $1,000. It was not a farm. She was white, and you can see there in the original they started to write NEG for Negro, but they had to scratch it out because she was one of the few white people on this street. She was 52 years old. For the married, it has the letter M, and then it's scratched through with the number 7. That number 7 was an indication on this census form that her spouse was not present. So further support that she was married, but that her husband was not anywhere to be found. She was not in school. She had a fifth grade education. She was born in Kentucky. And in this 1940 census, they asked a question, where were you living 5 years ago? And she replied, same house. More of her census record in 1940. She was not working, not seeking work, didn't have a job. She was engaged in housework. Her occupation, again, is blank, as it had been in 1920 and 1930. The yes here is a very interesting question in the 1940 census. Did this person receive income of $50 or more from sources other than money, wages, or salary? Yes. So Miss May didn't have a job, didn't have a salary, but she had an income. Wonder what she was doing. So now I've got several records that say Neely, several that say McNeely. I need to keep looking for records, and it didn't take long to confirm her actual surname. Here's another city directory entry from 1942-43. This time at 1116 College Street, we see Charles R. McNeely and wife May. H with a circle on it here means that it was owned, and we saw that in the census records that the house was owned at 1116 College Street, and the telephone number at that time was 50. So we are getting more consistent now that the surname really is McNeely. We see an evidence now of a Mr. McNeely, although he hasn't been with her in the census records. So that's interesting. So the next question I wanted to find out is, when did she or they get the house at 1116 College Street that was owned? So I went to the county archives here and found the deed. From 1916, Miss May Murray sold the house and lot to Miss May McNeely. Now the Miss there is interesting because she says in the census record that she's married, and we even have the suggestion of a husband's name, that McNeely is a married name. But here she's called Miss May McNeely. This lot fronts 100 feet on College Street. It runs halfway back to Main Street. But the Miss is an interesting name there. She paid $1,000 for this house and lot. It was $800 in cash, and then the other $200 was in monthly installments of $20 a month. At this point, I'm going to take a little diversion. I want to know at this point, when I see this record, who was Miss May Murray? And maybe was she in the same line of work as Miss May McNeely was? So let me show you about when Miss May Murray got this house and lot on College Street. In 1902, Miss Dicey Bond sold the house and lot on College Street to May Murray for $3,000. May Murray had not only bought the house and lot, but taken over the mortgage payments of Mrs. Bond. Mrs. Bond had purchased this as an empty lot in 1900, 2 years earlier. So between 1900 and 1902, Mrs. Bond had bought an empty lot and built a nice house on it. But then she turns around in 1902 and sells this house to May Murray. So the house at 1116 College Street was built about 1901 or 1902. What was May Murray doing with this house on College Street? I wanted next to go find a little more about May Murray, and again we're looking at May Murray, not May McNeely just yet. We'll get back to her in a moment. In the 1900 Clarksville census, in the 9th Ward, same neighborhood, but in the 1000 block of College Street, so we're not in at 1116 College Street. Remember that May Murray didn't buy that house for another 2 years after the census, but here's May Murray in the 1000 block of College Street. This census is very fuzzy, hard to read. Apologies for the copy there. But May Murray is single. She's the head of household. There are 7 boarders living with her in this house and a servant. The servant is a 12-year-old black girl, and the 7 boarders are all white girls in their teens, 20s, and 30s. Again, this is 2 years before she bought the house at 1116 College Street. More information about what these ladies were doing at this house on College Street in 1900. It's hard to see here, but it says boarding house, so Mae Murray is running a boarding house. And right here in the census, it tells us that they are all prostitutes. There are X's beside the occupation of each of these 7 ladies, and the census taker even wrote at the bottom of the form, prostitutes. Note that Mae Murray owned this house free and clear, so in 1900 she was living in a house that she had bought, running it as a boarding house and living with a bunch of prostitutes, and she herself was a prostitute. In the 1911 Clarksville City Directory, by this time she has bought the house at 1116 College Street. She's lived there for 9 years. And the entry there says Miss Mae Murray. It says 116 College Street, but surely that is a typo since we know that the house that she bought and lived in was at 1116 College Street. Okay, so now I've told you about Miss Mae Murray, who was a prostitute and had run the house that Mae McNeely bought, had run it for 14 years before Mae McNeely bought it in 1916. I went looking for Mae McNeely in this Clarksville City Directory in 1911, and I didn't find her. So I needed to know where Mae McNeely was prior to coming to Clarksville in 1916 and buying this house at 1116 College Street. In 1913, I found in the Louisville Courier-Journal a personals ad placed by Mae McNeely, who says she is an expert at manicuring and massage, house 1 block from the Sailback Hotel. I didn't find her in the Louisville City directories, but I found this personals ad and another one the year later. Personal lady gives massage, baths, Swedish treatments, and manicuring. McNeely, living on West Chestnut Street. So in 1913, 1914, this is a couple years before she comes to Clarksville and buys that house at College Street for $800 cash. She must have been doing well with a familiar business in Louisville. So here's that deed again from 1916 when Mae McNeely comes to Clarksville and buys the house at College Street for $800 cash plus $200 down per month. Mae McNeely was a shrewd businesswoman in her investments. So she starts up her business here in Clarksville in 1916. And if we come forward in time a few years, she has made enough money to start loaning money out to other people. In July of 34, Miss Mae McNeely and others have foreclosed on some loans that were made. So they've had enough money during the Depression to loan it out, but the people they loaned it out to haven't been able to pay it back. So in 2 different instances that I found, Mae McNeely had loaned money out to people but had to foreclose to get her money back. So she's making money at that house on College Street and she's investing it. So now that we've confirmed that Miss Mae's at 1116 College Street and her name really is Mae McNeely, I want to go back to the map that I showed you earlier because this is 1938. It's while Mae McNeely is operating the house on College Street. So which house do you think on College Street is hers? It's 1116, so it's going to be in this block of College Street. Do you know anything special about that map? Do you see one house that looks slightly bigger, maybe a slightly bigger lot than the others? This house right here is drawn a little bigger. The lot even looks a little bigger. There's a little more space in between it. So there you have on the 1938 map of Clarksville where Miss Mae McNeely lived at 1116 College Street. As I said, Mae had enough money where she could loan it out to people, but she also invested it in real estate. In 1935, C.L. and Susie Roberts sold to Ms. Mae McNeely a house and lot next door on College Street for $1,000 cash. So Miss Mae had enough money not only to run her business and pay her employees, but to buy the house and lot next door for $1,000 cash. I'm going to show you here a current map from the property assessor's website. The tract outlined in light blue is that 1116 College Street tract. You can see today that it's empty. The car lot was here and the office for the record service is there. And I'll show you that lot that she bought in 1935 from the Roberts was just next door. Just a few months later, she bought another house. In 1935, August of 35, William and Ada Mabry sold to Mrs. May McNeely a house and lot on College Street at the corner of Ford Street. So I show you here Miss May's house and the house she bought next door just a few months earlier than when she bought this house on the corner of College and Ford Street. We have a picture of that house, courtesy of the real estate appraisal card collection at the Montgomery County Archives. The bushes here obscure it quite a bit, but you get an idea that it's a one-story frame house. So Miss May McNeely bought this house in 1935 for $1,700, again paying cash during the Depression. What's on this lot today? It is the Technology Building at Austin Peay. Miss May was a real estate mogul during her time in Clarksville. In 1937, she bought another house and lot on College Street, or actually this one was on Main Street, but near where she lived. She paid $200 cash for that one. The next month, July of 37, she bought another house and lot on College Street for $1,000 cash. So she's accumulated now 5 pieces of property in her College Street neighborhood. December of 37, she buys another house and lot on College Street for $50 cash. So now she's got 6 pieces of property. In January of 1939, she bought a vacant lot along the railroad at Franklin Street. And to give you an idea of where this is today, I show you some adjacent current landmarks. U.S. Tobacco on that corner, across the street from Gateway Tire, and then Cook's Market is this lot. So the lot in turquoise there is the vacant lot that Miss May bought in 1939. She subdivided that lot and built 4 houses on it. So not only was she investing in rental property, she was building rental property during her time. One of those 4 houses is still there, in fact. The house next door to Cook's Market is dated 1940, so this is a house that Miss May had built and used it for rental income. In June of 1940, she bought a small cottage and lot backing up to her own property, fronting on Main Street. So now she's accumulated 8 properties in Clarksville, and she's built houses on some of those properties, and the rest are used as rental houses. I had a question at this point whether maybe she had purchased these rental properties for her girls, her employees, but I looked at these addresses in the census records, and the people who lived at these rental homes were always black people, so my supposition was that she was just using these houses as rental income. All of this time, these deeds we've seen are all sold to Mrs. May McNeely. But where was that Mr. Charles McNeely that we saw? Why isn't he in the picture? He's not in the census. He's not in the deeds. He was in one city directory, but where is the elusive Mr. McNeely? Here's a clue to the elusive Mr. McNeely. In July of 1944, there's a deed in which Mrs. May McNeely and husband, C.R. McNeely, sold the house and lot at College and Ford Street for $6,500. Miss May had bought this house in 1935, 9 years earlier, for $1,700 and turned around and sold it for $6,500 in 1944. When you sold property, the sellers had to acknowledge the deed before an elected official, either a justice of the peace or a notary public. And there was a great clue for this deed on the elusive Mr. McNeely. May McNeely acknowledged this deed here in Clarksville. Her husband acknowledged the deed in Floyd County, Indiana. Where is Floyd County, Indiana? It's right across the river from Louisville, Kentucky. Floyd County is shown in this lighter green. The county seat of Floyd County is New Albany, a river town just downstream from Louisville. So you recall that I had found Miss May living in Louisville in 1913, 1914, and New Albany is just right across the river from that. So at this point, I've got not only a name, Charles McNeely, but I finally have a location. So I want to go find more out about Charles McNeely of Floyd County, Indiana. When I found him in the census, I was startled. Here's 1930 Floyd County, Indiana census, Charles R. McNeely and wife May. So there's May McNeely listed in the household with Charles R. McNeely. He's head of household. He owns a farm. The yes there means it is a farm. He's 50 and married. He was married at 28. She's 42 and married. She was first married at 23. The age by her occupation or relationship says she was in housework. The date here got my attention because May McNeely also appears in the 1930 census in Clarksville. This census was taken on April 25th, whereas the census in Clarksville was taken on April 3rd, 3 weeks earlier. So is it possible that May was in both places? That on April 3rd, 1930, she was in Clarksville talking to that census taker. 3 weeks later, she's in New Albany with her husband when that census taker comes by? It could be. In Pauline's book, she talks about how in her own business in Bowling Green, there were times where she had to shut down the business because of law enforcement or restless neighbors. She would sometimes have to close her business for a while and come back. So it's possible, or plausible at least, that Miss May had to close her business for a period of time in 1930 to go back to New Albany and live with her husband. The rest of this 1930 census record shows that they both said that they were born in Kentucky and that their parents were born in Kentucky. Mr. McNeely's occupation here is listed as a horseman at a riding academy, and the WW out here at the end of his record means that he was a World War veteran. Moving ahead to the 1940 Floyd County census, here they are again. May McNeely is listed as head of household. Although her husband Charles provided the information, the X there next to his name means that he provided the information for the census taker. They're married. He's 52, she's 60. They both had an 8th grade education according to this census, both born in Kentucky. And there's that question again, same house, so they both said that they were living in the same house 5 years earlier in 1935. The second part of the record, she has no job, but she is doing housework. Again, her occupation is blank, but she owns the farm. The farm is listed O, owned by her. He is working as the caretaker of the farm. Again, the dates are interesting here because May also appears in the 1940 Clarksville census. She was in that census on April 11th, and she's listed here in April 24th in New Albany, Indiana. But again, her husband provided the information, so she may not have been physically present when the census taker came to New Albany. By this time, we've seen that May is a woman of means, so we know that she could have easily afforded train travel from Clarksville to Louisville and then on to New Albany, and she could have certainly afforded an automobile to go back and forth between Clarksville and New Albany. Another piece of information about Charles. Here is his World War II draft registration card from 1942. You can see his name, Charles McNeely, Star Route, New Albany, Floyd County, Indiana. A great clue here of his birthplace, Princeton, Kentucky. And his next of kin, wife, Mrs. May McNeely of Clarksville, Tennessee. So this reinforces the idea that they were living separate from each other, but that they were married this whole time. Princeton, Kentucky, I wanted to follow up on that clue, so I went looking for a Charles R. McNeely who was born in 1879 and living in the vicinity of Princeton, Kentucky. And I found him in the 1900 census for Marion, Crittenden County, Kentucky. Crittenden County, Marion is just adjacent to Princeton, Caldwell County. So that all makes sense. Charles here is living as a 20-year-old single son with his parents John and Elizabeth McNeely in the 1900 census for Crittenden County, Kentucky. His mother Elizabeth died 6 years later, and her obituary said her son Charles was living in Louisville. So Charles is in Louisville in 1916. Remember, I had found May McNeely in 1913 and 1914 in Louisville. So that suggests that they were married at least by 1913, that they were living in Louisville before she went to Clarksville and he went to New Albany. At this point, I don't have a maiden name for May McNeely. I don't have enough information to see if I could find her in this same vicinity, assuming that maybe this is where Charles and May met each other. So I have to keep looking elsewhere for other clues to her birth identity. I've got a married name for her now, May McNeely, but I still don't know who she was. So coming back to Clarksville, in May of 1948, May and Charles McNeely sold a house and lot there on the railroad, there where Hornberger and Franklin Street meet. That's next to Cook's Market, that house. Sold it for $2,000. Again, this was the lot that she had subdivided. When she subdivided it, she stipulated that all four houses on that lot were authorized to share the same water hydrant. So she still owned the other three houses on that lot and sold one of them. As we had seen before, she acknowledged this deed here in Clarksville, and Charles acknowledged the deed in Floyd County, Indiana. In March of 1949, which is 33 years after she had bought it, May sold the house and lot at 1116 College Street to Albert Roberts for $5,000. She had bought it in 1916 for $1,000. Sold it 38 years later for $5,000. So for 38 years, she was running her madam business in this house at 1116 College Street. Again, she acknowledged this sale here. Her husband Charles acknowledged it in Indiana. At this point, she's 61 years old. We had that clue from Pauline's book that May had retired to Florida, so this may be the time at which May McNeely retired to Florida. Coming ahead 10 years to 1959, Mr. McNeely, Charles Ratliff McNeely, died October 22nd, 1959, in New Albany, Indiana, where he had lived ostensibly for decades. The informant for this death certificate is his wife, May McNeely. So they were married the whole time that she was living in Clarksville. He was living in New Albany. As I said in that earlier census record, Charles was a veteran, and he was buried at the New Albany National Cemetery and has a military stone, 42nd Division, World War I. So this is November rather of October of 1959. Charles McNeely died. And 5 weeks later, November of 1959, May McNeely sold all of her Clarksville property, the rest of her holdings. And the great clue there is in that deed that she was then a resident of Hillsborough County, Florida. So yes, May McNeely had retired to Florida, and 5 weeks after her husband died, she sold the remainder of her Clarksville property to Roy and Ruby Collier for $16,000. Hillsborough County, Florida is Tampa, and Pauline had said that Miss May had retired to Florida some 10 years earlier, so that sets up that maybe in around 1949, 1950, after she retired to Florida, or possibly in conjunction with coming to see Pauline, is that reference we have in Pauline's book to Florida. So this is November of 1959. May has sold the rest of her Clarksville holdings, but only 6 weeks later, May dies. So in the Tampa Tribune, January 20th, 1960, we have an obituary saying that Mrs. May McNeely of Safety Harbor near Tampa had died on January 19th, the day before. Her obituary says she was born in Clarksville, although her census records all had said Kentucky, that she had moved to Safety Harbor from Tampa a year and a half ago, and she had lived in Tampa for 6 years. So this supports Pauline's statement that Miss May said she had been retired in Florida for about 10 years. We, at this point, Still had no maiden name for Miss May. We had her married name. There's no mention of children in this obituary, but there's a great clue here that surviving is a sister. And again, I'm getting to the identity of Miss May. I know her married name, but I still don't know her maiden name. I haven't found it at this point, so I need to go research her sisters now that I have a clue that she has a sibling. So next I'm going to go research Mrs. May Leslie Griffin of Safety Harbor. Here is a picture of the tombstone of May McNeely, and she's buried with her sister, May Leslie Griffin. May was born, according to her tombstone, 1887. May Leslie born 1889. So again, I'm going in search of May Leslie Griffin at this point. I don't know if Leslie is possibly a maiden name, but I'm researching May Leslie Griffin of Tampa next. I have a little family chart here now that I can start working on. I have siblings May, last name unknown, born 1887, who married Mr. McNeely, and a sister, May Leslie Griffin, born 1889. There's one picture I was able to find once I knew about May Leslie Griffin. It's the only picture I have found of Miss May, but in the 1952 Tampa newspaper is a picture of May Leslie Griffin of Hernando and her sister, Ms. May McNeely of Tampa. If you can't tell from the photo, they're holding a string of fish, and there seems to be a cat interested in that string of fish. I presume that May Leslie is on the left and Miss May McNeely is on the right. Only picture I have been able to find of Miss May. But again, I'm hoping that Miss May Leslie Griffin can lead me to the identity of both of these sisters. I found this clipping from decades earlier in the Tampa paper, April of 1911, about a harem skirt being displayed by Miss May Sanders. She's going to wear it in downtown Tampa and visit the Kinodrome Theater. The harem skirt was a sensation, a new fashion from Paris in 1911. May Sanders was the stage name of a vaudeville actress who was in Tampa for years, and the Kinodrome Theater referenced here was operated by a man named Scott Leslie. So we have May Leslie Griffin, May Sanders, Scott Leslie. That picture is coming together. I'll give you a picture here of what the harem skirt looked like, by the way. It's gathered near the ankles and caused a fashion uproar in 1911, apparently. I found other advertisements for Scott Leslie and May Sanders. Mr. Leslie operated theaters for a number of years in Tampa, and he was also, it was quite fascinating, he had quite a career as a filmmaker. He would travel around Florida and make little films that he could show in his movie theaters as his way of making income. So he was known early on as a vaudeville performer, later on as a film producer and theater operator. I also found this clipping where May Sanders and Scott Leslie were appearing as a double vaudeville act. And this clipping occurred after May and Scott had already married. They married about 1911 and continued to perform. She performed under the stage name of May Sanders and he with his real name as Scott Leslie. In the census records, May Sanders Leslie said that she was born in Kentucky, and that's a great clue I like to see because May McNeely said she was born in Kentucky. And they're supposed to be sisters, right? Sanders at this point becomes a theory on her maiden name, their maiden name, May Sanders and May McNeely. Maybe Sanders was a maiden name, but I don't know that yet. But May Leslie Griffin's obituary unlocked the next key in this search to find the identity of our Miss May. So at this point, I've got this family tree. I've got these siblings, and maybe Sanders is their maiden name. May Leslie Griffin is married to Mr. Leslie and later to a Mr. Griffin, but it's her obituary that helped me get further in this genealogical puzzle. 1978, May Leslie Griffin died there in Safety Harbor. near Tampa, and it lists survivors, more siblings, in her obituary. A brother Everett Russell of Washington, 3 sisters, all living in Washington State. And the brother Everett Russell there now gives another clue that maybe their surname was Russell, because I have May Leslie Griffin under the stage name of May Sanders, but she has these siblings, including a brother with the Russell surname. So now I'm theorizing that maybe Russell was their surname, and maybe that will help me find out who May McNeely was. At this point, I've got this family tree I'm working at. So my next task was to go looking for these siblings with a Russell surname, possibly living in either Washington State or maybe Kentucky, and with these 2 girls as siblings as well. So what I found was a 1910 census for Crittenden County, Kentucky, in which 3 of these Russell siblings were living. Susie Russell, Everett Russell, and Evelyn Russell all appeared in May Leslie Griffin's obituary, and they're all living in Crittenden County, Kentucky in 1910 in the household of William Russell and Alice Russell. At this point in time, May McNeely would have been 22, May Leslie would have been 21, so they're too old to appear with this household. But this is the same county, Crittenden County, in which I had found Charles McNeely in 1900. So this is the same county where presumably Charles and May McNeely met each other. But I don't have them in this census. However, there is a great clue in the 1910 census if you haven't noticed it before. Not only do they tell us whether someone is married, but how many times they've been married. In this census, this family, this couple both says they're in their 2nd marriage. So that means that Alice M. Russell used to be somebody else, and you see that she has had 12 children and 8 of them are living. Well, there's not enough children here. There's more children than unaccounted for. So that sets up the working theory that Alice is the mother of May and May Leslie, and that they are half-siblings to these Russell children. So I went looking for that marriage record between William Russell and Alice, and I found William Russell and Alice Sanders' son got married in this county, Crittenden County, in 1893. So May Sanders was the stage name of May Leslie Griffin, and maybe that was based on an actual surname of Sanders' son. Still working on the theory that Alice Sanders' son is a mother to May and May Leslie. So here's the family tree at this point. I've got Alice Ordway, her maiden name from that census record where William Russell, it says his mother-in-law was Nancy Ordway. They're married in 1893. They have these children who are listed in May Leslie's obituary as siblings, but it appears that these 2 girls may actually be Sanderson if I can prove that Alice Ordway Russell was formerly married to a Sanderson. Here's the 1900 census record for the same Russell family 10 years earlier, when May would be 12 and May Leslie would be 11. So what do we see in this 1900 Crittenden County census record? Nanny M. Sanderson, born 1887, same year as May McNeely, and Lucy L. Sanderson, born 1889, the same year as May Sanders, May Leslie Griffin. So I present to you siblings May McNeely and May Leslie Griffin, born Nanny Sanderson and Lucy Sanderson, Crittenden County, Kentucky. I did find the marriage record for Alice Ordway to Charles Sanderson. So these are the parents of these 2 Sanderson girls. Charles and Alice had married in 1884, had these 2 children 1887, 1889. Charles died in 1892, and then the following year, 1893, is when Alice married Mr. Russell. So that fills in the family tree very nicely, that May McNeely is Nanny May Sanderson, born 1887, who married Charles McNeely. May Leslie Griffin is Lucy Sanderson, born 1889, who married Scott Leslie, and they're the daughters of Charles Sanderson and Alice Ordway. That makes the obituary for May Leslie Griffin match that her siblings are actually her half-siblings, her half-Russell siblings. The last record I found would have been very helpful had I found it earlier, but in this whole research project, it was actually the last record I found, and it was the marriage record for May Sanderson and Charles McNeely. And it took place June 29th, 1909 in Williamson County, Tennessee, Franklin. You can see Charles McNeely married May Sanderson. It would have been helpful if I had found this early in my search, because that would have gotten me to the Crittenden County Sanderson family much earlier, but it does confirm what I had already proven by other means, that May McNeely was May Sanderson. There's an interesting notation, by the way, on this marriage record: don't advertise. So it must be that they eloped to Franklin and didn't want their families to know that they had eloped. So Miss May of Clarksville was Nanny May Sanderson McNeely, born 1887, Crittenden County, Kentucky, married in 1809 in Franklin, Tennessee to Charles McNeely. They were living in Louisville, at least by 1913, but she comes to Clarksville and buys that house and is living there from 1916 to 1949, running her business, and then retires to Tampa, Florida, where she's there for about 10 years before she passes away. I was not able to find Charles and May in the 1910 census to confirm, and I looked through Williamson County, I looked in Clarksville, I looked in Louisville and New Albany, just couldn't find them. But I want to tell you next about the location that May lived at, 1116 College Street, after Miss May sold it in 1949. Here's a picture of the house. It's the only picture of the house that I've been able to find. This again comes from the real estate appraisal card collection at the Montgomery County Archives. On the left here you see a two-story frame house with a screen porch. That's Miss May's house. That's the house that was built about 1901, 1902, that she lived in for 33 years before she sold it to Albert Roberts. Albert Roberts himself is an interesting character, businessman, funeral home director, ran a cab company, a bigger-than-life figure. He's also, if you've heard the stories, possibly linked to Governor Austin Peay. So Albert Roberts buys this property in 1949 from Miss May and promptly builds a block building on the lot next to the street, in which he operates a nightclub. In the 1950 Clarksville City Directory, Albert Roberts owns 1116 College Street, in which is listed the College Street Tourist Home and the Queen City AmVets Club. When I saw the name Tourist Home, we would think today of bed and breakfast, but I did wonder whether or not this might have been a Green Book entry, where African Americans traveling knew that this was a place that they could stay. But the Green Books that I was able to find were much earlier than this, so I wasn't able to confirm if the College Street Tourist Home was a Green Book location. The AmVets Club next door there went by that name in 1950. By 1952, these properties were called the Queen City Hotel and the Queen City Rainbow Club. I did find one hint that maybe the famous blues musician Muddy Waters played at the Rainbow Club, maybe about 1954. By 1955, however, things were going on at this club that caused it to be placed off limits to Fort Campbell soldiers. I find those addresses listed in the Clarksville newspaper of places that soldiers were not allowed to go. And 1116 College Street was one of those places they weren't allowed to go. By 1957, it had changed hands, rebranding as Club Plazard, supposedly to maybe get rid of its past that caused it to not be able to be patronized by for Campbell soldiers. In 1962, this location is known as the Pink Poodle. And you may already know the name the Pink Poodle, and now you're seeing a picture of it. It was at 1116 College Street, next door to Miss May's house. One of the most famous people to play at the Pink Poodle was Jimi Hendrix. Here's a picture of Jimi Hendrix playing in the Pink Poodle in 1962. The Pink Poodle hosted many bands, active nightclub, but it had some of the same problems that some of the previous instances had problems with illegal alcohol, suggested prostitution, reports of crime. The Pink Poodle was padlocked in 1964, and the building was said to be vacant in the 1965 Clarksville City Directory. By 1967, Mrs. Ida Horton was living in the house at 1116 College Street. 1970 Directory Stewart's Barbecue was operating out of the block building at the front of the street. Stewart's was also in trouble for gambling and alcohol and prostitution. By 1971, it was known as the Plantation Club. It was also padlocked in 1971, but it had reopened sometimes later. In 1974, the Plantation Club here was still in business. By 1976, this location is no longer listed in the city directories, so it's not clear when the buildings came down. In 1998, the property was sold to a church. So I hope I have educated you a little bit about who Miss May really was, what went on in Clarksville, what she did in Clarksville. The aspects of her real estate investments were really quite surprising to me. The long marriage to Mr. McNeely, but they never seemed to live together, except possibly during times when Miss May had to close her business. So I appreciate you watching, and look for my other videos on my YouTube channel.